Yeah, I changed my location today, so I'm at my home bar.
You're at the bar. I wish I had that.
I'm at the bar, yeah. But you're drinking, so that's always a good thing. What do you got? What do you got in your glass?
Actually, it's iced tea.
You pulled out the old switcheroo.
Yeah, I didn't want you to feel bad. I got to work out later, so I was afraid of I got my scotch here this early. I wouldn't make it.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I'm not. I'm a man of my word here, and I'm doing
All right, glad to hear it.
I'm breaking out the wine. This is a 2010 Reserve, Broken Earth Winery, 2010 cab that I've got. I don't know. Darren's really in the wine. Derrick Groves, our CEO over here at TrueFit, and this is one that he suggested last year sometime. I've never been a big wine drinker, but have recently started enjoying some of these. I don't know. Well, if you get the right ones, they're incredible, right?
Yeah, no, we're in 15, so we I should make some recommendations given all the vineyards we're in. So
you definitely should. Anything that goes well with a cigar, I'd be all ears.
The one I want to get paid in is the Chateau Palmer, which their cheapest bottle is like $1,200. That's their low end bottle. So Chateau Margaux. So it's like
that's incredible.
Yeah, so that's low end. High end is who knows what. Who knows what? I don't even know. I don't want to ask. Like their stuff is their stuff is. But anyway, it's an interesting vineyard. In fact, you can actually see. Yeah. No, actually, the one recent post that I just did today on my LinkedIn is Magrez, which is another very, very high end vineyard in France. So they use this. I sort of collect images of all the different vehicles we've used in all the different vineyards, and I never knew such tractors and vehicles existed. The one in France, the one in Magrez, that's a oddball. That's like only in France kind of tractor. So
that's awesome, man. So before Bloomfield Robotics and kind of getting into the wineries, were you into wine prior to that? Like, did you have a deep rooted background in wine and vineyards?
Other than maybe if I was a bartender in college, counting is like, but that bar was not a place where
you weren't getting fine wines.
Yeah, I was not getting fine wines. So, but no, I'm not really. I mean, I wasn't, and I've had to make up for a lot of, I'd have to make up for a lot of, cover a lot of ground in the last couple of years to learn about things like veraison and bud break and inflorescence, all these things. Now, when I talk to wine people, they're like, "Whoa, I don't even know about some of that." Oh my goodness!
I mean, that's the life of an entrepreneur, right? Becoming an expert in very short order.
This guy's like all deep into different types of Pinot and all that. So it's a world unto itself. It's I could share with you some of what I've learned. The one thing that probably stands out to me is the differences between even within the U.S., the differences in techniques for different types of Syrah, or you'd think, well, it's all pretty similar, and no, everyone has their own kind of recipe. But the thing that really struck me was, in France, you always think of the old world ways and how they make grapes and how they make wine and how they do all that. And then you think of, it's almost like an artisanal, you have this image of this artisanal people still stepping on grapes and, and all that. And then you think of California and you think of all technology and who knows what tools are being used. It's actually the other way around.
Really?
It's in France. They're heavy into the science of viticulture, science and technology. They spare no expense on something that's going to give them an advantage, something that's going to give them even a small advantage.
Yeah.
California for a lot of people, it's I wouldn't call it a hobby, but it's they enjoy the kind of farming aspect of it. So they don't necessarily have all the technology one
I feel like a lot of people don't really understand the competitive nature of wine, right? And especially when you get into some of these generational vineyards in Europe, and really like how they came to be and what they went through to stay, through the world wars and everything. Like,
yeah, I think the hard part is, if I were to, from my observation, probably the hardest part is, you imagine you're a business person, a farmer. You're basically you're promising to deliver something to somebody for a price, and say 9 months or a year later, and a whole lot of things are going to intervene in between, of which you have no control, mainly the weather,
right?
And not just the weather where you are, but the weather everywhere.
Yeah.
And everywhere wine is grown, and you're sort of at the mercy of that.
Yeah.
And so you've got to try to the extent you can control for that. They always joke, if you want to become a millionaire in the wine business, start off as a billionaire. I mean, it's crazy. It's a tough business if you're not committed to it. And I from what I can tell, the growers will always say, look, it was years before I started to see profits. And, and it's interesting. And even, we're in table and wine grapes. So even in table grapes, the kind that we all eat and use for other things other than wine, challenging, but
yeah, it is a fascinating industry. I was into the process when like Somm came out on Netflix, and then Into the Bottle, and and those they did a great job of touching the surface, but there are so many more layers that you can peel back when it comes to the history of wine and all of that. It's absolutely fascinating.
If I were to recommend a wine documentary to your listeners, viewers, it would be something called Reds. And it came out a few years ago, and it talks about the wine boom and bust in China. There was a point in time when there was this incredible demand in China. Of course, China's huge. And so even a mild uptick in demand for a commodity, say French wine, pretty much it would absorb the entire capacity of France.
Wow.
That's the uptick. And as a result, prices went through the roof. Vineyards that were, one gentleman, he had an inventory that normally a building, they showed this room where he had his inventory, normally would make 5 or 10 million. He'd bid up to hundreds of millions of dollars. It was, and just as quickly as it took off, it went away. There was a great a Chinese entrepreneur who had actually bought a chateau in France, had it disassembled, sort of brick by brick, and moved to the Gobi Desert, where he attempted to create a vineyard in the Gobi Desert.
That's so crazy.
But it's that kind of commodity. It has a prestige and an allure about it that probably sets it apart than any other crop.
Yeah.
Even cannabis, for example, different.
Yeah. Yeah, that's wild, man. Wow. So let's do this. I want to know, Mark, right? Well, I want to know your past, your history, like
Yeah.
where your roots are, where you came
Yeah.
from. Did you ever think that you would end up with a robotics company that was floating through some of the most prestigious vineyards in the world? Give us the past.
Yeah, sure. How far do you want to go back? Because I'm
I want to go all the way, man.
all right,
Let's
I'm an
go all the
old
way.
guy. Yeah. So I was born in this great city of Pittsburgh. I lived here till I was about 4. Lived here till I was 4. My dad was a dental student, and when he graduated from dental school when he was 4, we went back to where he was originally from, where I ultimately grew up, which was the Shenango Valley in Sharon, PA. I get a little over an hour from here up that way. Small town where 79 and 80 meet, right on the Ohio line. Little town specifically called Sharpsville, a town of 6,000, where Santa Claus visits every home when Santa Claus is sober. So, and sometimes when he's not. And my father was he was in the war. He was in the Pacific, and he delayed his entry into college and graduated from dental school when he was 36. So he actually started college when he was 28. And my father was kind of my idol, my hero growing up. And
That's
and my
awesome.
family, my dad is the son of Italian immigrants. My grandparents came from Italy. My grandfather was from Rome, in a little village outside of Rome. My grandmother was from a place called Cassino, Italy. There was a big battle there in World War II, Battle of Monte Cassino. My mother was, very much a, Protestant. Goes back a couple hundred years, English,
Wow.
Scots Irish, so that sort of thing. And grew up playing sports, wasn't a terribly good student, and played football and wrestled, and went away to college, University of Dayton, undergrad, and continue to be in sports. I wrestled in college for 3 years in college, and did my share of having fun as well. And my dad said you can't wrestle for a living, so I had to figure out what I wanted to do. And I was dating a woman when I was in college. I stayed for another year, got a master's in business there. Decided I wanted to go. So I was in my early 20s, and I'm like, okay, what do I do now? And I was in a bar with my friend from high school, and he's like, what are you going to do? And I said, I think I want to do politics. And he says, well, are you going to Harrisburg? I said, no, I want to go to Washington. So I went to Washington. So I just got in a car and drove to Washington. I had a friend from college and law school there, and had a couple cousins there, and ended up knocking on doors, got a job with a then congressman, Tom Ridge, young congressman, who ultimately became governor of this great state and Homeland Security Secretary. So that was my first exposure to politics. I then got a job from there working for another congressman, a guy named Mike DeWine. And Mike is now the governor of Ohio, but he was a young congressman back then. Did that for a while, decided to want to manage a political campaign. So I went to Maine and managed a political campaign for another fellow named Rollin Ives. Only someone who lives in Maine can have that name. And ended up managing that campaign, and we lost. We ran against the sitting governor of Maine. The only time in the history of, it's one time previously in the history of the United States when a sitting governor ran for Congress, just my luck. So we lost. And, but I learned a lot about Maine. One is the people who live in Maine are there by choice. Nobody accidentally ends up in Maine. That's what I want to tell you right now. There's a famous joke about Maine. I love Maine. And there was a joke there's a Route 1 runs all the way up the eastern side of the state. And there was a husband and wife, and they were on vacation, and they were driving on Route 1, and they were looking for this famous diner that's on Route 1, and I can't think of the name. And And they said, they see an old, lobsterman, classic Mainer kind of walking on the side of the road. And they said, "Sir, do you know where the such and such diner is?" And he says, "Yeah." And he keeps walking, and that's the joke. Anyway, so that's Maine right there. You got to know Maine to understand that joke.
I've got a very good friend of mine that lives in Maine, and he was not there by choice.
Yeah, there you go. Okay.
His wife is from there, though, so he's actually Latino who is living in Maine. So the winters are pretty tough on him.
Yeah, pretty tough. But when they're cleaning the streets with giant front loaders, you're in for trouble when winter hits. But so I did that, and I came back to Washington and kept on rolling. Ended up getting a job in the Justice Department briefly for a while as a policy analyst. That's an interesting story in its own long story there. So I actually had a little what sort of looked like a badge, but not really. And then ended up working on the Capitol Hill again for John Hines, a senator from Pennsylvania who died tragically in a plane crash. I worked for him up until he passed away. Wow. Worked for a consulting firm, Booz Allen, for a while, and then after the senator passed away, ended up getting a job in the White House. Yeah, I worked for President Bush, and that was wild. If anyone who is listening has ever been to the Washington D.C. and you're on Pennsylvania Avenue and you're kind of looking into the White House, there's a building next to it called the Old Executive Office Building. Looks like a wedding cake. That's where my office was. I had what used to be a closet that they turned into an office there on the third floor. I could tell you, Alex, I could go on and on about my experiences there. They were many and varied. So quite an experience of privilege. Yeah. To sit in the meeting with the President of the United States and Chief of Staff of the White House, and got to brief him and on different issues. I worked for the science advisor. So every president since John Quincy Adams has had somebody sort of advising him on the science and technology. It became a formal Office of Science and Technology Policy when Eisenhower was president. He made it a formal role. First, I think science advisor was the president of MIT. So wow. I got to learn a lot about technology and the role it plays in our society and policy and science and tech policy. And I'll tell you one story. Maybe I shouldn't, because maybe there's some statute of limitations if I tell this story.
I mean, listen, I'm not a journalist, but I love inside.
All right, here we go.
So,
yeah. So like directly across the street from my third floor window is what's called the Blair House. The Vice President Kamala Harris stayed there, I think, because until the Vice President's residence in the Northeast was getting repaired, so she stayed there. But typically, heads of state, when they come to Washington and overnight, they stay in the famous Blair House. And one night, the Greek president was in town, and it was a summer night, and I was late, and he was with his entourage on what was the third floor of the Blair House, and I could sort of see right in. And if you've ever seen, for those of you who are Alfred Hitchcock fans and seen the movie Rear Window with Jimmy Stewart, it's a kind of similar kind of thing going on. I'm like just looking out the window, and it's at night. Our building's, mostly empty. I call a friend of mine from high school, and I say, "Hey, Leo, I'm looking in and I can actually see the president, the Greek president. He's like right there. I can see his entourage." And I got to tell you, it's a little weird. He's got a robe on, and but it's open, and there's maybe half a dozen people in suits, men and women sort of walking around him. And I'm like, his robe is open and he's, in a classic Greek style, he's just wearing his underwear and they're like bikini kind of, he's an old, kind of heavy guy and it's like middle-aged guy. And I'm like, and so I felt like Jimmy Stewart in there. I'm like, whispering to my friend from high school, like giving a blow by blow of this Greek president walking around with an open robe in the middle of a meeting. And sure enough, he walks up to the window and I'm thinking, does he see me?
Wow.
White House staffer accused of peeping Tom on Greek international.
I can see the headlines now, man. That's crazy.
Greece relations between Greece and the United States at an all-time low. But
ever since then, it's never been the same.
Yeah, no, weird. But it was a privilege. And then when President Bush lost, I was a political appointee, so I was out of a job when the president's lost. So ended up getting a job with Texas Instruments. So I was a lobbyist for Texas Instruments for 4 years. And so
you've had a really interesting, and I want to say this before, because I know that you're kind of getting to where you are today as you sip your whiskey looking iced tea. Like you've had a really interesting past, from a guy that grew up outside of Pittsburgh.
Yeah, no, I mean, a little town guy. I got to see a lot. I traveled the world actually when I was with TI. I had the chance to spend a lot of time in Europe. In particular, lobbying isn't what people think it is. At that time, Texas Instruments was a Fortune 60 company, so I had a chance to work for the CEO of the company. He was a CEO, chairman, and president, and travel around the world. That time, Texas Instruments was heavily into defense work. Half their revenue was outside of the U.S. in 48 countries. They have operations. They're the largest, still, I think, the largest U.S. investment in Italy, for example, and France. Wow. They have a big operation in France, TI Germany, all that. But along the way, I was also a professor. I taught when I was in Washington. I ended up getting a second master's degree. Ended up getting a second master's degree at American, and then I ended up getting a PhD at George Mason while I was there. So I had started teaching at the University of Maryland. But anyway, long story short, I was kind of done. I was done. I had done my duty and enjoyed it thoroughly, learned a lot, and I was 35 and I was done.
Wow.
And I said, okay, I kind of want to do something else. I knew that if I didn't leave, I wouldn't leave. So I was thankful for the experiences. I remember, Alex, when I left, I shouldn't say it. Well, I'll say it. But my lobbyist friends had a party for me, all my tech lobbyists. So lobbyists from Apple, IBM, AT&T, they had a big party for me at my favorite restaurant, which is no longer around. And they gave me a bumper sticker they said, where are you going? And I said, well, I'm going to Pittsburgh. I was in a kind of a group meeting and they're like, there's a long silence.
Like what?
To visit? And I said, no. I grew up there and I was born there and, I'm going to live there. And you're going to live there? So, this was an incomprehensible
and it's
idea.
Hilarious.
Yeah,
it is hilarious because, I mean, what year was that?
This would have been 98, 97, 98.
Yeah. So, I mean, like the tech scene, like what we know today as a tech scene in Pittsburgh, like unless you're in manufacturing or something, like, and even then, like there was nothing in Pittsburgh.
You know what drew me? What drew me was there was a guy named Rich Florida who was a professor, pretty well-known guy now. He was a professor at Carnegie Mellon. I met him when I worked for Heinz and in the White House. And I knew Carnegie Mellon was a gem, was a real gem. And that someday the world, technologically speaking, I mean, in the worlds of science and technology, Carnegie Mellon was known then as one of the finest technical universities in the world.
Yeah.
And it's only
well, and you've
enhanced this
probably
trend.
seen it, right?
I saw
Behind the
it, yeah.
scenes. I mean, at
Yeah.
very high levels of the government, you were
Right.
in the back door, heard the conversations where technology was going.
Absolutely. And I could see sort of from a government, I could see the internet, I could see a lot of stuff. And I thought, this is what I want to do. I want to do
Wow.
this. I want to do this. And somehow or another, I want to get involved in this somehow. And, but I knew that I'd spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley, actually, and in Texas, in Austin, for my role at TI in particular. And I saw a lot there, but I knew that I wanted to go where everyone wasn't, so that I could build something versus just going into a cauldron of Silicon Valley or some other place. So I knew that Pittsburgh, I just had faith that someday that city would take off. It took longer than I thought it would, but it's taken off. It's happening. So I moved here and just moved here, and I didn't have a job or anything. I'd done some consulting when I was here. I started teaching at Carnegie Mellon really from the day I arrived. I knew the dean at who ended up becoming a provost, a guy named Dr. Mark Camlett, great guy. And he said, "Hey, you want to teach here?" I said, "Sure." So I started teaching, do consulting, ended up doing a little bit of consulting with back in the day with free markets. Before they went public, I had a good fortune of working with some people there that, as a consultant, just sort of kind of got to see the inner workings of this high-flying .com darling. And that's when I really became entranced. And I said, okay, I'm going to stay. This is going to work. Ended up being, continued to do consulting for companies here and elsewhere in a variety of capacity, pretty much any way I could, because I really wanted to understand how you start a company. I just didn't know. I'd never done it. I came from a different world. I had no experience. I was in my mid to late 30s at that point, really starting over, Alex. I mean, I'd say to anybody out there who's starting over, I don't care how old you are. I don't care where you come from. I don't care what credentials you have or don't have. You can start anywhere. You can start over. My dad was probably my inspiration in that regard, starting college at 28. So I was just like, yeah, fine. Everybody does this, right? You just start over. And so I did. So I learned from the ground up. I worked with, I don't know how many startups, I lost count, just doing a little bit here, a little bit there, earning a buck, trying to, feed myself while I'm learning. And I had a chance to see the inner workings of a lot of startups, not just in Pittsburgh, but some other places. Along the way, got lucky a couple times, made a little bit of money, but eventually I knew that right around the 2006, 2007 or so time frame, I thought, I really want to dig into this. Time to start a company. So ended up co-founding a company called Mobile Fusion. We made a small throwable device that the military would use. You'd throw it into what they call a denied area, and it would use a really crude early version of machine learning that actually didn't really work that well, and would use clusters of sensors to see stuff inside this really an unsafe space. You basically would throw it into a cave or throw it through a window if there's bad guys on the other side of the wall. And this friend of mine, was in Iraq, and he was going into a room, and there was somebody in there, and they got him. And so I thought, well, hey, we can use this technology to see behind doors, walls, all that. So we developed it. We got money from Innovation Works, money from the Department of Navy, even an intel agency gave us money to build these things. And then my co-founder at the time, who was getting his PhD, dropped out of the PhD program at CMU to do this. I remember with this colonel who was right out of Central Casting, Colonel so-and-so in the Pentagon is like, well, you boys really like what you're doing. This is really good stuff. And we're like thinking, okay, here's where we get the contract, right? To build 4 million of these. And he's like, we need a little bit more field testing and, 4 or 5 years, maybe we'll start taking this in the field. And I didn't hear anything.
Wow.
I didn't hear anything he said after that.
Yeah, 4 or 5 years. That was it.
Yeah. Right. My co-founder and I looked at each other and said, man, we got to get out of this because there's no way we're can do that. This is for the big defense contractors. And so we went through a period of, bit of a desert there on a personal level, professional level, let's say, where we had to reset the company. We had to lay everybody off. We didn't have any money.
Wow.
In fact, I had so little money that if you were in a 20-foot radius of me, your credit card debt would go up. I was a black hole of debt. I think at one point I had like a $75,000 in credit card debt, and because I had to pay, we had to pay people, we had to pay off some debt. We had to just, we had to reset the company. If otherwise we'd have had to crater the company. So,
and this right now, like what you're describing, I think is what a lot of entrepreneurs, those that have ideas that think that they want to create a startup, they need to know, right? These are the things that aren't talked about as much. Everybody sees the success. Everybody sees the Duolingos, right? Everybody sees what you guys are doing now with Bloomfield Robotics, but very rarely do they look at the Mark DeSantises of the world and say, but what did it take, Mark, to get to here?
Oh boy.
Like, what was the history? We're in this age of like microwave popcorn culture. Like, we want to pop it in the microwave and we want to turn around in a minute and a half. If it's any longer than that, I don't want it. Right. And the truth of the matter is, being successful in entrepreneurship means years, if not decades, of going through and getting your stripes, taking those lashes, having those failures to get to the 1 or 2 successes that you experience.
Could not agree. Alex, and if nobody heard anything else I said, and we just freeze this, what you just said, just put it in a capsule and send it around the world. I have a friend who's a guy named Craig Crookston who lives here in Pittsburgh. He's a retired Navy SEAL officer and also an entrepreneur in his own right, tech entrepreneur. And he told me one time, he goes, Mark, it's like entrepreneurship is like being a Navy SEAL in that you just have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think that, that's entrepreneurship. You just, people see it as the glamorous pictures when they just got their 10 million in VC money. And like you say, when they buy the company, but they don't see the valley of tears. My co-founder and I literally would walk around the block in the South Side where we had our, I put on quote marks, office, and where we would have, like you say, a few years where we were repeatedly again and again faced with, should we crater this because we have nothing? But I'll remember this, and I want to tell a short story if it's any incentive to anybody.
Please.
So we were walking around the South Side, and one summer day, and we were really it was pretty bad. I won't bore you with the details, but it was bad. He and I were both in the company and the two of us were in a bad way, in a bad spot. Yeah. And I said, Abby, what are we going to do? And he's like, well, my family, I've always been, my family's in the power industry back in India. And I've always been believing that we could do that here. We could be in the power industry. And I'm like, okay, power industry. Yeah, we
Yeah,
could use
let's
our
talk.
AI. Yeah, you're right. You know, it's not a small
There's a lot of
thing,
money in the
right?
power, right? Yeah,
Right.
let's
It's not
go.
like just go open a, you know, what are you going to open a utility? He's like, no, I want to use the AI we could use it to help people manage their electricity, maybe buy their electricity, you know, because there's the largest commodity market in the world. Few people know this exists, but there's this giant real-time market for power being bought and sold every day. And we could use that AI in a way that no one's ever used it, which would help people predict what the price is going to be in that day. And then the buyers and sellers using our tool could make money or reduce losses. And whoa, where'd this come from? We were making throwable devices for the military. What? And he's like, yeah, no. And I said, all right, don't humor me, because this makes no sense. And I don't see any point in us trying to do this, but go on, continue. And so he's like, I go, well, how would it work? He goes, well, first of all, we'd have to develop the technology in a short period of time and get it working. So we need to have some people willing to test it, like a big industrial firm that buys power on a big basis.
Yeah.
Like an Alcoa, because they smelt aluminum. It takes huge amounts of electricity to do it. They surely would have somebody buying and selling. Yeah, let's just call them up. Okay, fine. Like, not realistic.
You're going to look through the phone book at this time, and you're going to dial Alcoa.
You don't even have just Alcoa. Hey. Would you like to? So again, remaining skeptical shows you my faith in my colleague here. He said, well, the other thing is we'd have to partner with a big, somebody that's huge in, private company, not a utility, but somebody who's in the power space. And well, when I think of, I don't know, companies big in power, I think of like, GE, right? They make generators. They make 1/4 of all the power in the world generated every day is on a GE generator somewhere in the world. Huge, massive business, $50 billion division, one division in GE making power generators, huge business. Okay, yeah, let me call, once I've hung up on Alcoa, I'll just call GE. Hello, GE. We're two guys that are on the verge of collapse, and would you work with us?
Listen, as a long-term sales practitioner, this is hilarious to me.
So like we had no connections to nobody. We knew nobody about anybody. Anyway, so one last thing. So finally he said, so Mark, in order to do this, because it's a regulated industry, we would need to have somebody that really knows how power markets are regulated. And so probably have to get somebody like an advisor or something to help us who really knows power markets, something that's hard enough, but to find somebody that's an expert in that, would be expensive and impossible. Long story short, 2.5 years later, we had 3 of the largest industrial buyers of power in the United States as customers, including also companies like Safeway and a lot of other big companies.
That was incredible.
We had General Electric Ventures, when they had a venture fund, invest $11 million in the company. Number 3, we had on our board of directors a guy named John Wellinghoff, who at that time was the just retired chairman of the FERC, which is the FCC for the energy industry in the United States, a former chairman. We were featured in all the magazines and industry rags and you name it. And all of this from that moment, and I want every entrepreneur to hear this, we were not on our back. We were on our backs below the surface.
Yeah.
It was bad as it can get. Personally, professionally, and every other way, no hope. Everyone had given up on us. This is a joke. This is, get on with your lives. No. And in 2.5 years, that's where we ended up. It is possible to climb out of the hole, to climb out of the mud and get yourself back in the game. You just have to want it bad enough.
And I want to ask this question, and this is going down, and this is one of the things I love about the webcast that I'm doing, is that it's mine and I have no agenda. But I think that it's important, and we'll get to the IoT stuff and what you're doing with Bloomfield Robotics, because that's why we're here too. But I mean, you're saying 2.5 years from when you and your co-founder were walking around in a sea of depression in the South Side, right? To getting those types of contracts. Like he brought this up and you were like, okay, let's do it. Like, or I mean, like there's kind of a cliffhanger there, right? There's more meat to that bone.
There is. And I have to give it credit to my co-founder, Abhishek Sharma, who now works for Amazon in Seattle. He's one of their lead buyers. He's managing their
That's awesome.
wind farm business in Amazon
incredible.
in Seattle. He's a big deal there. And I got to give him credit. I mean, I didn't know diddly. I spent 5 years in that industry. Still don't know enough about that industry. It's incredibly complicated, but he convinced me that technically such a thing was possible. I also have to give credit to General Electric. I think General Electric's a different company now than it was when we were working.
GE, we're going to tag you guys.
GE, great company. I have nothing but positive things to say about the company. Which is impressive from a very large organization like that. It is. I mean, nimble, they're so enormous in every way. It was funny. I used to joke with them every time we got on a conference call with them. They spent the first 15 minutes introducing themselves to one another. I'm thinking to myself, you don't even know each other, and you're trying to. Now we have to introduce ourselves. So every call was a new person, but I learned a lot about the industry. I learned a lot about corporate innovation. I learned that the challenges with companies trying to innovate. It's hard. It's hard for big companies to innovate. The incentives in many ways aren't always there, and they're too big. There is a thing of being too big. It's too big, right? And it's also, in the innovation culture. I had to do when I presented to the General Electric, you had to get some number of senior people to sort of sing your praises and say, yeah, by all means, venture fund, invest. And, you have to go through a series of meetings with senior executives. And I remember how open they were about, how challenging innovation was, even in their own company, and how I was astonished at how frank they were about, their own challenges with me. You think of corporations as everyone's toe in the line and nobody's willing to, not there. Brutal honesty was the thing I saw. So that was an admirable. And so from that experience, we actually spun, and here's where things get a little interesting. We actually spun a hedge fund, a small hedge fund out of that company. It was there's a thinly traded market that exists in and across the United States for people that buy and sell what's called the physical market. People that are buying and selling wholesale power. There's a thinly traded market where people hedge in that market. And my co-founder, again, in his genius, started to say, hey, he was paper trading with this little fund, and he was getting some returns. So we ended up starting a little hedge fund. Of course, we spun it out. It was funny. John Wellinghoff, the chairman of the FERC's, like, okay, I know this is a separate company, Mark, and the one company owns a little bit of the other company, but this is starting to look like Enron. So, mini Enron. And so, we have to break these things into two entities. So we ended up selling the hedge fund. At that point, having sort of moved over to the hedge fund and now out into the world, I was kind of like, now what do I do? So this was 2017 or so. And I met this guy, Christoph Mertz, who is a researcher at Carnegie Mellon in the Robotics Institute. And he said, hey, I have this idea of using cell phone and AI to assess road surfaces, the way the city of Pittsburgh or San Francisco or London, wherever, the way they assess roads. They normally, the dominant method in the world is you put 2-3 people in a truck and a case of beer, and you drive around and you look down at the asphalt and you make notes about what you see, and then you make a judgment about the condition of that section of road, and then that determines what treatment that road gets to preserve the road or tear it up and start over. You know, people think of, so I know a lot about, believe it or not, asphalt and concrete. If you're interested, anybody, I can tell you all about
anybody.
A block crack is, an edge crack, raveling, rutting, even alligator cracks. So all of those things are patterns that form on asphalt and concrete that are like the precursors to what we know about bad roads, potholes, right? I always think of potholes as, if you think of potholes as kind of road cancer, and your job as the road doctor, the person that works in the road maintenance department of a city, is to be the person that sees the precursors to road cancer. You know, the little things that that show up as seams or cracks or features that actually form distinct patterns, Alex. And so we used our AI to see the patterns of what's forming, and then indicate to the public works department what's happening and what they should do about it. And so we came up with a road rating system. Data was captured by a cell phone, put in the windshield of a car, or anything that's moving, really. We used postal vehicles, street sweepers even, and drive around. It would capture the video of what's ahead. And then this artificial intelligence would then commence to isolate the roadway in the field of view and begin inspecting that road. And our city, when I co-founded the company, we built the company up over about 3 years, ended up raising almost $12 million and getting it to about 190 customers, up to the A round, which was a $7.5 million round, at which point I decided to move on. That one has some complexity associated with it. Sometimes that happens too. So the company still exists, is doing very well. But at that point,
mention the name of the company or no?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Fine if you can.
Yeah, no, Robotics is a good company.
It sounded like Robotics. Yes, I just wanted to verify that it was indeed.
Yeah,
Robotics.
No, it's a good company. It's doing very well. You know, I'm still a major shareholder in this wonderful company, and wish it the best. But I think there's a point at which, you know, companies need to evolve, and relationships change. And every founder, if you're out there, it's going to happen to you. There's a point at which those relationships aren't what they were at the beginning, and maybe it's time for some of the folks who were the founders to move on. And at that point,
fantastic wine, over time things change, right?
And you know what? It's funny. It's not I don't have any sort of negative feelings about, you know, the transition. It was just something that probably needed to happen. Anyway, long story short, I decided, okay, now what I want to do. And at that point, so we're talking, I want to say fall of 19, kind of September timeframe. I was really at a point where I'm like, you know, maybe I'm just going to kind of just do some consulting. I teach, I'm having fun. And I didn't have any great vision forward for the rest of my professional career. I was just going to kick around and see what's what. And then I met George and Tim.
Tell me about George and Tim.
All right. So George Cantor, Dr. Cantor, is 20 years experienced building every kind of robot and ag tech through the Robotics Institute you can think of. You know, everything. I mean, all kinds of fancy things. And one of his grad students, Tim Muller-Sim, who's now our CTO, George being the chief scientist now, they I met them through the tech transfer office. Reed McManigal at Carnegie Mellon, great guy. It's just
Reed is a great guy.
And Reed, he has like what I call he runs what I call the candy store, you know, which is where all the technology and he shows you, he's like pulls stuff out and you got to see now.
I love his sheet. I love his sheet
right.
of
exactly.
He's got the breakdown, right?
And let me share this with you. Let me share this delicacy with you. And so I saw it. I met them. I think I was 5 minutes in. I'm like, oh, I have to do this. That's awesome. This is crazy. I say this because it was similar to robotics, taking pictures of plants, rendering a judgment from the image using deep learning. And then that judgment would then inform a bunch of actions.
Is this something that they used to do on the back of a quad with a case of beer, and now they do it with the robot?
No beer.
No,
yeah.
No beer.
No beer.
Okay. Okay.
And they had the vision all laid out. I didn't come in and bring some kind of grand vision or strategy by any stretch. I came in more as a mechanic to say, all right, we got to raise money. Here's some other people I know. We got to consider bringing these people in. But they had the vision, the technical vision, the market vision, the market opportunity. Yeah. It was, I don't want to say it was all worked out, but conceptually it was there. And then I just casually looked at how big the ag market is, not paying attention to it, show you how ignorant I was of it. It's the largest industry in the world. so, how did I not know
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't
largest
know that.
industry in the world. And if you took Alex, if you took agriculture and sort of put it into two buckets, one bucket would be the crops. When you think of ag, we think of wheat, rice, corn, vast fields, waves of grain, all that. That's about 80%, give or take. And then the other 20% is pretty much everything else. So all of our Whole Foods, fruit and vegetable counter, the ornamental flowers. And then you could extend that further. You go into cannabis, even trees. All these things fall into the category of specialty crops. Now they go by different names, sometimes perennials, you name it. It's about $2 trillion. $2 trillion. And I remember I was talking
and I'm in technology and we don't talk about ag tech. Rarely, maybe 10% of the time.
Well, times are changing, Alex. I'm going to tell you that right now.
Yeah, no kidding.
So there's several timing. I think timing's everything for anybody out there too. Timing's everything. Ag tech is now a hot market, getting hotter, and for a long time, ag tech has been around. If you will, go way back. When people thought of technology 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago, or even 2,000 years ago, or even at the birth of agriculture 10,000 years ago, when in human history, when people thought of technology, they often thought of farming implements, farming technology, because farming was the dominant thing back in the day, because the intense level of effort required to grow food for us to survive. And so any advances in technology that existed for the last thousands of years often were in ag. So I almost laugh when I say ag tech wasn't so hot. Ag tech was it for technology up until the Industrial Revolution, when people started to make machines and all these other things that we now think of as technology. But agriculture implements was ag tech. So anyway, so I digress. So ag tech, everyone always imagined as AI and robotics started to emerge. And if you go back 20, 30 years, people started to take seriously the notion that one day we could automate a farm. When you think of the cost of farming, it's an intensely labor-intensive activity, even still. And that's where money is won and lost in ag, is how you manage your labor. It's still very labor-intensive. And it's labor-intensive primarily because it's complicated. Grabbing an apple is a lot harder than you might think. We take it for granted. but a
Right.
robot struggles with that. So you need human hands. If you're grabbing apples one at a time, or oranges one at a time, or grapes, clusters of grapes, need a lot of hands, need a lot of labor. And so they always imagined that robotics would one day make that all much more efficient. Well, that time may be approaching. And Carnegie Mellon has been in ag robots for 30 years.
Wow.
Little known fact. And so ag tech has always been, in my mind, a bit of a backwater when it comes to VC funding. It's been that way for a long time.
Yeah. Like I said, I mean, people don't talk about it. Like, you don't hear about ag tech, until you hear about ag tech. Like,
until you hear about it. But here's something that I think has made, there's a little bit of a giant looming forcing function here that's making ag tech more important than ever. And that is human population growth. So we are going to add, we've got about 7 billion people in the world right now. We're going to add another 4 billion people in the next 30 years. We're going to have a 40% increase in world population in 30 years. We're going to have to grow more food in 30 years than we've grown since the invention of agriculture 10,000 years ago. We're going to have to do it on less arable land. There's no Iowa, there's no Ukraine, there's no vast fields of rich earth.
Right.
It's all consumed already. And we're going to be able to, probably not going to have all the tools that we use now, all of the nutrients and fresh water that we drench the plants in and all that. Those things are going to be more expensive and less available to the grower. So you're talking about, how do we feed the world? And so you're starting to see that now in the discussions, and people are looking at tech and saying, please give us an answer. If it's any indication of how hot ag tech is, IBM, Google, Microsoft, Samsung, Sony all have ag tech divisions. All of them.
That's crazy.
All of the big data houses. You also then look at the players who've already been in the market, the Bayers of the world, the John Deeres of the world, all of whom in the last 5 years have made major investments in ag tech. So what's specifically going on in ag tech? A lot of things. You think biological solutions to GMOs have been around for a while.
Right.
You think of the autonomous tractors that people talk about now, and we've worked with some autonomous tractor companies, but really it's all around data.
Yeah.
And if I can know the condition of my crops, if I can predict the impact of weather, if I can know the condition of the soil, if I can know all of these variables, which to most farmers are largely unknowns, if I can know them with precision at scale cheaply, I get control. Why can't, the question is always, why can't a farm be like a Toyota car factory where they produce perfect cars coming out the other end? Well, it couldn't up until now, because in a Toyota car factory, everything's controlled. Every screw that goes into the car is inspected before it goes into the car in a specific place at a specific time. The whole process is tightly controlled, thus perfect cars. In a farm, I don't control the weather. I don't entirely know how much moisture is in the soil. For that matter, I don't know the mineral content at different parts of the soil. I don't know the genetic makeup of every plant and the reaction that's going to have to all these things. There's a lot of kind of unknowns. Data makes those known. Doesn't necessarily give you control of them, but it makes them known at scale. And when I say at scale, I'm talking about knowing every single thing about a farm. So that's my big description and my context for saying, here's where we fit in.
Right.
What we do is we tell specialty crop growers, the world's growers of apples, peaches, pears, bananas, cacao, grapes, all of those folks, we tell them the condition of every single plant, tree, bush, vine in their grow on a continuous basis.
Yeah.
So they can do what every farmer now, ultimately every farm will need to do, and that's precision agriculture. The analogy I would use is if we all had a tutor in every subject from the time we were born, imagine I'd have done so much better in college and high school. So much
right.
Oh my goodness, what I would have done. I believe, who knows? But if we all had that, we'd all be better off. It's completely non-scalable. We couldn't possibly do that. There aren't enough tutors. It's not going to happen. So we sit in classrooms.
Yeah.
We sit in classrooms. And so in farming, it's the same thing. Ideally, a farmer would be able to manage every single plant individually. Every plant would get its own unique treatment of water, light, nutrients, etc. And thus that plant's maximum potential would be realized. Every single tree in that every vine in that vineyard would be maximized because it's each getting its unique treatment. I couldn't do that until now because I didn't know the condition of that tree, bush, or vine. I do now. And so if you look at the big ag programs around the world, they have what they call plant level management, believe it or not. Managing a farm, not by the acre, the classroom, but to the plant.
Which if you think about it, if you think about really what that means, right? You could say it, but if you think about what that means, I mean, to put a number on the plants in the crops globally, I mean, what is that? How many is that? Is that millions? Is it billions? Is it trillions? I mean, how many plants?
It's billions. It's it's a massive amount of,
and then the amount of data that is required to manage to the plant globally
to the plant. So
look, it's insane.
And this was George and
Tim.
And
I want to say this for a second too. And outside of globally, right? Because you guys are doing some cool things with NASA right now. So not even just globally.
We've got our Matt Damon t-shirts. I got my Matt Damon. I didn't wear one today, but I have one. But no, absolutely. I mean, that's I give credit to George and Tim and their vision. They saw it way back when, and they're in the field. They're like, hey, this farmer, these vineyards do not know the condition of 99% of their plants. They actually do not know the exact condition of their vines. They have a general notion, and as a result, they can generally apply certain things to it and hope that a good result comes. Now I know exactly the condition of down to
but up until now, it's been a guesstimate, right? It's been like hey, I think this is what's going on. But you guys are bringing the science into the individual plants, into each row that's been planted. So talk to me about that. Like we've come full circle, right? We've talked about Mark's Pass. We're coming in. We're talking about Bloomfield Robotics now. But what is Bloomfield Robotics? What are you guys doing?
We take pictures of
What is the product?
We take pictures of plants with a little camera about the size of a toaster that sits on anything that moves. We've used ATVs, tractors, you name it, autonomous vehicles. It's about the size of a toaster. It has 2 lenses and its own light source. You put it on that vehicle and drive. And you just drive in and up and down the rows. And it images every single thing it sees, every plant it sees. It's got a little antenna that knows where it is. So it's actually geolocating every plant. So it's taking a picture of every tree, bush, vine, and everything on it. And then our AI in the cloud, once the camera's full of data, it goes up to the cloud, and our AI commences to take every vine, in our case, grapes, vines, or every tree, what have you. And then it looks at that plant at the pixel level the same way you and I would if we had a tomato garden, where ideally, if we were skilled agronomists as well.
My tomato garden is not that big.
Well, Alex, I mean, you're looking, what are you, a foot away from your plant, right? You're looking at maybe the size of the tomato, the color of the tomato, maybe the leaf density. You want to move the leaves out of the way to get some more sun. A whole variety of things you're looking at on that plant. We're doing the same thing. Our imaging is looking at everything on that plant. It's describing everything on that plant. And then it's functioning like a doctor and like a coach. Like a doctor, it's looking at the plant and it's determining whether or not there's something wrong. Hey, it's just before veraison, and we're starting to see blue spots on grapes on vine 6 row 7 and vine 19 row 34. And those blue spots are bad. Those are a disease. And somebody needs to go out there right now and pull those grapes off that tree and take a look at the tree and maybe have to destroy the vine. We're also looking as a coach. We are looking at the performance of the plant at different times for different types of plants.
Wow.
It's bud break and we're not seeing any buds on these 3 vines. Or the shoot density is too much on these plants. We need to do some shoot thinning on row 6, vine 7, and so on. That level of detail, very fine grained. And so the grower is then informed as to what actions they should take to ensure the productivity of every single plant, tree, vine, or bush in that grow. But there's another kind of subtext that's actually making it a bigger game, which goes to your point about data. We're digitalizing that plant. So we're going back over that plant, that vine 6 row 7. We're going back over that plant again and again through the year after year after year. These are perennials. These plants live for a long time. So we're now digitalizing this plant through its life. And by tracking it, not only for the year to make it sure it produces adequate grapes of a certain quality, we're actually tracking it through its life, which then allows the grower to make informed judgments about in ways they never had access to.
So through that, you're able to track trends eventually, and then able to help them, whether it be through data simulations or otherwise, like what to do to keep the crops, make the crops healthier maybe next year or
higher yields. It's about higher yields,
which feeds all the way back through your, initial like world supplying the world with food, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what can we do with minimal effort to get the highest amount of yield possible?
More with less, Alex. It's more
with less.
How do we get more with less? So higher
yield. That
yield,
is fascinating.
Higher quality crops, and then crop protection. Now, you mentioned NASA. We were fortunate. So believe it or not, NASA has had and has a very large program called Space Crops program.
Which is crazy to me.
Yeah. There's a greenhouse in the space station right now. They're growing plants in space. It's about the size of a small refrigerator, and they're growing, I think, right now, peppers, maybe spices, some other things. And they really want to, among other things, determine the effect of weightlessness, right, on crop growth. They also want to determine the impacts of things like background radiation, et cetera. And why is that? Well, maybe one day we can grow vast quantities of crops on the moon or Mars.
Yeah.
But one thing's for sure is, from what I understand from our friends at NASA, is it's going to be very difficult to carry enough food to make the journey to and from Mars. Yeah. And in fact, what you'll have to do is actually grow the food along the way to allow for the journey to happen.
Yeah, because the time to get there is
huge, months.
A massive part of the problem, right?
Yeah. And so so we were contacted. So we applied for what's called an STTR, which is a grant. It's about $1 million. And we were approved for phase 1 of that. And to build, get this, one of our cameras that will go into the ISS, if all goes well, within the next 2 years, and look at and monitor the crops in the ISS. And if that goes well, then hopefully, and again, this is all, now we're into the realm of if, we will send one of our cameras to the moon when they land a greenhouse on the moon, which they plan to do. They will land a greenhouse on the moon.
Yeah.
And we will monitor those crops. I know that's weird. We are the only, I'm sure of this, company in the world that can claim a blueberry grow in Peru. We have just added a very large blueberry grower, one of the premier vineyards in France, and NASA as customers.
It is comical.
I mean, it doesn't get any
level
weirder.
Of this that is absolutely comical.
It doesn't get any weirder than that.
And I giggled just a minute ago because, like, I'm thinking your story. You once upon a time were a struggling entrepreneur walking around Shady Side, broke as a joke, no direction, no guidance, and now you are literally working towards just a better future for everybody, and videotaping plants on the freaking moon. Like, it's mind blowing.
Well, when you, like, I always think of my favorite quote is, favorite book is Man's Search for Meaning. You know,
okay.
It was written by a guy named Viktor Frankl. Probably some of you may have read it in high school. You know, it's one of those kinds of books everybody got assigned to read. Probably nobody read. You should read it. Everyone should read it.
It's your favorite book. So that tells a lot about you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and it you know, when you're in the throes of the valley of tears, as I call it, that every entrepreneur goes through, the valley of woe, and every entrepreneur goes through it, and it's brutal. He was a psychiatrist, and he was Jewish in Austria in 1938, and you can imagine what probably happened to him. He went to 5 concentration camps over 7 years. His family was wiped out. He was a psychiatrist when he went into a concentration camp, survived. The book is sort of like 2 stories being told at the same time. One is the terrible ordeal of going through those concentration camps and surviving, which itself is a book in itself. But then he wrote it as an observer of the human condition, to try to draw some wisdom from it. And what he was concluded was that survival in these environments was brutal. As brutal as it could possibly get under any circumstances, anywhere, ever. And he concluded that some people treated the experience as if it were almost a nuisance, that someday they were in there for the wrong reason, someday someone would come and get them and it would be better. And therefore they never really dealt with the difficulty that they were living through, and they almost lived in a kind of an illusion. And he said, sadly, those people passed away very, very quickly. They did not survive for very long. The people who were able to survive such as they could, given that ultimately most people died anyway in those terrible conditions.
Wow.
But the people who could survive the longest were people who looked at that difficulty not as a nuisance, but as something to be endured. That in other words, they gave it meaning. They gave the experience a personal meaning. Some people got more religious. Some people considered it a personal challenge, that they were not going to be broken by this experience, no matter how bad it got. And I say this to every entrepreneur: when you're going through that difficulty, and it can't even approach what happened in the Holocaust. So let's just say that out loud.
Yeah.
But
doesn't compare.
Yeah. But to be inspired by this person, to be inspired and take his inspiration from what he said, which is, when you're in that, when, you know, as Churchill says, when you're going through hell, keep moving.
Yeah.
You know, keep going.
Yeah, don't stop.
Do not quit. Do not quit.
Yeah.
You're the only person, no matter how bad things can get, and believe me, they can get bad.
Yeah.
Is no matter how bad it gets, you are the person to decide when it ends for you and nobody else. You're the person to decide when your dream comes to an end. And by the way, which should be never. And
Yeah.
Only you decide. Circumstances will be thrown in your way, and believe me, you won't see them coming sometimes.
Yeah.
And when they happen, you know what? You got to be like water rolling down a hill. You go over it, under it, and around it, but do not ever give up.
Man, I cannot. The amount of gold nuggets that are within the last hour and 20 minutes for an entrepreneur. Like, if you're an entrepreneur, like, this is the episode for you. Out of everything that I've done, and honestly, Mark, like, everything that I've done up to this point, it's all been shooting from the hip, man. And this has just been absolutely incredible. Before we wrap up, I do this to every guest, and I really do this to 95% of the conversations.
You're going to make me do a shot of Jaeger.
If you do a shot, listen, this is the first time in my life that I've gone through an entire bottle of wine. I've never in my life drank a full bottle of wine. I did it with you tonight on this webcast. It was a fantastic wine. My wife's going to kill me later because they're going to be useless. But this is it. This is the last. This is it. That's all there is. It's beautiful. It's incredible. Darren, thank you for the recommendation. I love it. But I do this every one, and it's where you guys are today. Within our network of IoT, my personal network, whoever watches this, what can we do for you? What are you guys looking for? What is next? Like what do you guys need help with? And if anybody's out there, if they can kind of help you guys push that needle forward in any way, shape, or form, what would that be?
Well, here's the big one. Anybody that wants to join this journey with us, let me know. Send me an email.
Okay.
I mean, we're not in a position right now to be hiring lots of people, but maybe someday in the not too distant future. So we want people to join us on this journey. The great thing is, this is national class talent in our humble little city. There's national class talent.
I'll put us up against anybody out there.
Yeah. I mean, it's as good as it gets anywhere in the world, actually. And, so all I would say is, if you're interested in, maybe not now, maybe sometime in the future, who knows when, but if you're interested in helping us and joining this journey, reach out to me, mark@bloomfield.ai. And, even if it's just, hey, I'm placeholder, I think this is really interesting. When you guys get spun up, sign me up. I want to hear more. Absolutely. Yeah. That's what, the folks listening, because we're going to need that talent.
Yeah. Awesome. Mark, thank you so much for the time. This is the longest that we've done, but it is absolutely worth it. I appreciate you. Appreciate you, what you've done in your history. Bloomfield Robotics is incredible. So thank you so much, man.
All right. Thanks again, Alex. You take care.
All right, buddy. Yep. You too.
Yeah.